Hello, everyone. My name is Evie Lupai. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today, I want to talk about choking, which, at least if social media is anything to go by, it seems to be everyone's favorite quasi-kink activity right now. It must really get up your engagement on TikTok when you post a thumbnail that uses choking in it. But I shouldn't be too glib, because this is going to be a serious discussion. As we have talked about on the channel before, choking is on the rise, and it seems to be getting more and more popular every year, especially among younger folk. And at the same time, very few people are getting educated about it. And when they do find education, it is usually online, and it seems to be, shall we say, questionable at best. And as a kink educator myself, I am very interested in what we can do to help make sure people are engaging in safer, not safe, but safer forms of breath control, and that we are giving them an accurate assessment of the risk involved as much as possible. And as we all know, preaching abstinence is not a solution. So I have been both excited and nervous as new research has come out in recent years, giving us opportunities to understand better the scale of choking as well as how harmful it might truly be. Up until this point, we in the kink community had to largely go off of assumptions, common knowledge, or making inferences from studies that did not actually look at consensual choking. But we have someone in our corner who has been really leading a lot of research, and that driving force has been none other than Debbie Herbenick, who is a professor at the Indiana University School of Public Health, who is also a lead investigator of the National Survey of Sexual Health and Behavior. So if anyone is going to know about choking in the modern age, it's going to be Dr. Herbenick. We've talked about her research before too. In particular, a study that looked at choking on college campuses. If you don't know, a lot of research only looks at college students, but I think it was actually meaningful in this case. It showed a pattern, a troubling lack of explicit consent, knowledge, or concern for risk, and that choking often occurred between strangers and during casual hookups, sometimes without any previous conversation at all. And that study told us it's happening a lot, like a lot, and it's happening more with each graduating class. It didn't give us any solutions, though, nor did it tell us what the medical risks of rampant choking on campus might be. So, today, I want to talk about some newer research, because that might finally be able to start to tell us exactly how concerned we ought to be and what some of those medical impacts might be. And this study was actually covered in the New York Times. In an opinion piece penned in April of this year, Dr. Herbenick and Dr. Kawata, somebody she worked with on the study, also out of the Indiana University School of Public Health, were interviewed to give their thoughts on their research. The study, published in the Journal of Neurotrauma in July of 2023, conducted fMRIs on young adult women who had frequently been choked during intimacy. The study defined this as 4+ times in 30 days. They also measured the results of a control group who had never been choked. But before we talk about the results, I want to go over the New York Times article a bit more directly. They have published some op-eds recently that have been controversial, to say the least, and I think it's worth holding a magnifying glass to the piece so we can better understand any potential bias that could be coloring how they relay the research findings or how they conduct the interviews they're doing. The author of this piece, Peggy Orenstein, has frequently written about childhood sexual development and remarks in that piece that she has been increasingly asked about choking by younger and younger people. That's concerning. So she has seen the same worrying lack of consent in education, adding that, quote, a male freshman said, quote, girls expected to be choked, and even though he didn't want to do it, refusing would make him seem like a, quote, simp. And a senior in high school was angry that her friends called her vanilla when she complained that her boyfriend had choked her. And ooh, that last bit makes me so upset. I mean, you can't really stop teenagers from using whatever language they're gonna use, but that is not how we meant vanilla to be used. It is not meant to be an insult. It is a simple descriptor for folks who don't engage in kink. But leave it up to teenagers to turn any word that points out a difference as an insult, I suppose. We need to do some kind of public awareness campaign about it the same way that we have done with other words. And I think that worked pretty well, so maybe we should try that. But also, with 2/3 of women in college reporting being choked, it actually really isn't even that kinky anymore anyway, but that's a conversation for another time. Peggy goes on to write, quote, choking, Dr. Herbenick said, seems to have made the first leap in a 2008 episode of Showtime's Californication, where it was still depicted as outre, then accelerated after the success of 50 Shades of Grey. By 2019, when a high school girl was choked in the pilot of HBO's Euphoria, it was standard fare. The chorus of Jack Harlow's Lovin' on Me, which topped Billboard's Hot 100 chart for 6 non-consecutive weeks this winter and has been viewed over 99 million times on YouTube, starts with, I'm vanilla baby, I'll choke you, but I ain't no killer baby. And, okay. So we're gonna attack this in order. I have a couple of thoughts here. Okay, first of all, why are we blaming 50 Shades of Grey for choking exactly? I have done a lot of research on 50 Shades of Grey. I have watched all of the movies, and I have read the books from Christian Grey's perspective. And as far as I can remember, there is no choking anywhere in any version of that universe. Given E.L. James is a terrible author, so maybe she forgot about a scene with choking in it while rewriting the books from the other direction, or she tried to retcon it out of existence once it became too popular with vanilla people. I swear, writers and researchers who are not familiar with what's in the books blame it for every new trend in sex they personally find disquieting. Now, I do not want to give E.L. James credit that she does not deserve for a trend she did not start. And I suppose if we're arguing that it got people interested in kinky sex or rough sex in general, maybe they would have easily found choking in their research of that, just not in the books or in the movies themselves. And secondly, the Jack Harlow song. I wish I could do a whole Todd in the Shadows style takedown of that song, but I simply lack the musical knowledge. I, however, just need to get it off my chest that I find the lyrics both concerning and confusing. Is he saying that choking is vanilla, or that he's vanilla, but even though he is, he's willing to choke his partner because it's what she wants? Someone please decode this for me. I don't understand. The message is not clear. But in any case, it is pretty clear through popular media and scientific data that choking is becoming more common. But what are the health implications? And let's start to talk about the study. So, if you're a sports fan, you may recognize the name of Keisuke Kawata, or at least you're familiar with the results of his work. He was one of the first to point out a link between subconcussive head trauma and CTE, a progressive degenerative disease of the brain associated with combat and contact sports like boxing, American football, and ice hockey, among others. And now, he's unsettled by the rise in choking. Quote, I see a similarity to CTE, he told me, though the mechanism of injury is very different. In this case, it is oxygen-blocking pressure to the throat, frequently in light, repeated bursts of a few seconds each. Those whose experiences are non-lethal rarely seek medical attention, because any injuries seem minor. The symptoms resolve, and all seems well. But as with those NFL players, the true effects are silent, potentially not showing up for days, weeks, even years. And to me, this highlights a blind spot we have had in the community for a long time. We generally take the tact that if there's no immediate injury, the thing we're doing is probably relatively safe. We tend to assess risk on the basis of acute issues, sudden nerve damage during a rope scene, or passing out and hitting your head while being choked. But we don't often consider the risk of cumulative damage, especially when there's no signs of something being wrong the first, fifth, 20th, 100th time that we do something. In rope bondage, for example, one of the most risky ties you can do is something called a TK. And for a long time, it was the go-to standard for chest harnesses if you wanted to be suspended. And now we have had people that have been doing TKs for years or even decades. And so now we are starting to see from that what some of those cumulative risks might actually be for rope bondage, though we didn't really have an awareness of them before, at least not in a wide-scale way. It seems that there is a risk, not just for one scene at a time, but a risk that builds and builds the more you do the same thing over and over and over and over again. And by the time you notice a nerve injury, how reversible it may be is not clear-cut. The sad thing is, I still see people who are teaching intro classes to brand new people to rope bondage, and even intensives that don't go over the very basics of acute nerve damage, let alone the more insidious repetitive variety we may now be finding out about. I guess talking about that would kill the vibe though, and we need more time to do more rope, so let's just skip over it. And I think we have also seen the same thing when talking about breath control as well. Given in that environment, a lot more people do front load the conversation with like, don't do this, it's too dangerous, none of it's ever fully safe, but let's go ahead and teach you how to do it anyway. And with that though, even if you're getting a little bit of knowledge, you're not necessarily getting the full picture because, again, the focus tends to be on sudden, obvious problems like bruising or passing out, rather than on longer range impacts that are quite variable, like cardiac arrhythmia, which can lead to cardiac arrest, or even what might come from repeated engagement, be that repeatedly passing out or repeated light squeezes around the throat. I was just at a convention a couple of weeks ago where someone insisted on asking the presenter if and what the safest ways to repeatedly pass out were. And the presenter, to their credit, did not really give anything away other than to say it's very dangerous and they advise someone to not do that. But clearly, whether it is lifestyle kinksters wanting to engage with a high level of breath control or college kids doing it casually in their dorm rooms with people who are basically still strangers, we are mostly flying blind about what the risks of recreational choking actually are. And that brings me to the meat of the study, the results. They found, quote, according to the American Academy of Neurology, restricting blood flow to the brain, even briefly, can cause permanent injury, including stroke and cognitive impairment. In MRIs conducted by Dr. Kawata and his colleagues, undergraduate women who had been repeatedly choked show a reduction in cortical folding in the brain compared with a never choked control group. They also showed widespread cortical thickening, an inflammation response that is associated with elevated risk of later onset mental illness. In completing simple memory tasks, their brains had to work far harder than the control group, recruiting from more regions to achieve the same level of accuracy. The hemispheres in the choked group's brains, too, were badly skewed, with the right side hyperactive and the left side underperforming. A similar imbalance is associated with mood disorders. And indeed, in Dr. Herbenick's survey, girls and women who had been choked were more likely than others, or choked men for that matter, to have experienced overwhelming anxiety as well as sadness and loneliness, with the effect more pronounced as the incidence rose. Women who had experienced more than 5 instances of choking were 2.5 times as likely as those who had never been choked to say that they had been so depressed within the previous 30 days they couldn't function. Whether girls and women with mental health challenges are more likely to seek out or be subjected to choking, choking causes mood disorders, or some combination of the two is still unclear. But hypoxia, or oxygen deprivation, judging by what research has shown about other types of traumatic brain injury, could be a contributing factor. Given the soaring rates of depression and anxiety among young women, that warrants concern. And I agree, this does warrant concern. And I'm going to start by addressing this in reverse order. And let's begin with the mood disorders. Haven't we also been saying for the last couple of years now that phones, in particular social media apps, are really bad for people, especially the mental health of teens and young adults? And don't we also now know that social media and the internet are full of choking, be that on adult sites or on TikTok or pretty much anywhere else you can go? Could it also be the case that the high social media usage group, who are the most likely to be the most exposed to choking, is also the group experiencing higher rates of mood disorders? Just from the data here alone, we cannot say that choking is causing higher rates of depression or anxiety. I'm not saying the study tries to say that, but if for some reason a reader were to try and extrapolate that, that would not be correct. But it could be that people who are on social media are also the most likely to try choking, and that also, separately, that could be causing them to have more mental health issues because they are on social media so much. Does that make sense? So I would really be curious to see if there is any difference between the social media habits of the control group who had never been choked and the choked group. And I think something similar could also be said about the changes in memory, though I admit that one actually has me more concerned. I think it's a lot easier to say that there are other variables at work when the issue is general mental health, especially for issues like anxiety and depression, since it seems like just about everything these days is set up to make folks' mental health way worse. But memory, that's a little trickier. I mean, I don't think social media is great for memory or recall or attention span, but with anything pronounced, the only other thing I can come up with is maybe post-COVID brain fog, and that's more or less it. But even as I am reading through these results, and I'm getting worried myself, I don't want anyone to panic. This is just one set of data, and only 41 people were enrolled in this study. It is far from being explanatory about everything. It is clear we need to see if these results are going to be repeated in future studies, and hopefully we should also conduct some more longitudinal research, which is something the authors have also suggested to do themselves. And I would also like to see specifically what counts as choking and if different ways of doing it have some kind of impact, because obviously there's light pressure choking, there's two hands, one hand, there's using a belt, there's all different combinations, and obviously choking as well is not even an accurate term for the behavior, and maybe a distinction there would be meaningful, but also maybe it doesn't make a difference, and that would be important to know. I also think conducting a baseline mental health sample and social media use surveys, that would be really good if we could do that. Given this would have to again be more longitudinal, we'd have to follow people for several years, we'd hopefully catch them before choking began, assess them there, and then every year thereafter, things like that, and just see if there are any implications for life, maybe higher risk of stroke, longer memory issues, longer lasting memory issues, just overall worse health outcomes. We're not really going to be able to know that with just this one study. So I think what this highlights for me is the importance of caution at this point in time, because it really only shows how little we really know about the impacts of repeated choking over years or even just a month. And in the kink community, we have oftentimes relied on the conventional wisdom of how people do things in judo or in BJJ. I've often heard it repeated, even in classes, this idea that those people who do those sports get choked out all the time, and we've never heard of anything really bad happening, so it must basically be okay. And that definitely gives some people the idea that as long as what they are doing is a safe, correctly done blood choke, the risk of anything bad happening is pretty minimal. But it turns out that might not actually be so true either. In the last several years, people within the BJJ community have been compiling data which suggests that there is a link between choking and strokes. Yes, even safe chokes performed by high-level athletes who know what they're doing. The risk of a stroke comes from two angles. One is a choke either leading to the dislodging of a plaque or from a mechanical injury causing an arterial dissection, a tear in the artery which can lead to clotting. That clot can then break off, which can cause a transient ischemic attack, or a TIA, and it can also cause a stroke. That same kind of tear can also happen during kinky play as well, and the damage can also seemingly be cumulative. So, it seems the fact that a popular figure in the sport hasn't had a stroke the public knows about is more of a fluke than a sign of safety. Unofficial numbers now being collected posit that multiple people at the same gym could be having strokes or mini strokes, and it's being swept under the rug because people want to pretend the sport they love is not the cause. Some suggest that as many as one in a few thousand practitioners could be having strokes. Now imagine that level of risk when 2 out of every 3 college-age women are being choked, often by strangers and with little to no safety knowledge. And to make matters worse, one of the most common risks, those tears, often go undetected, even when people do seek medical attention, which they hardly ever do. Doctors would be looking for a clot instead of a tear, and when they do look for tears, they often go missed if contrast isn't used because of the fact they're on healthy younger patients. Some of the side effects described by Dr. Herbenick, like loss of coordination, ear ringing, and blurred vision, actually sound troublingly like the warning signs people are now looking for more and more in BJJ. Could these college-age kids be putting themselves or their partners at risk for, or even having, major health complications without realizing that's what they're doing? I mean, after all, strokes don't happen to young, healthy people, right? Right? Yeah. I mean, honestly, the more I have read about this, the more and more concerned I've become. That's why I'm making this video. The other risks of choking are bad enough as it is, right? The risk of passing out and hitting your head on a sharp table corner, for example. But this seems really bad, and especially as people are doing it more and more, and as they're gaining false confidence, they're doing it harder and harder and more frequently with the same person, it is going to be increasingly common, and those risks are also going to be popping up more and more. And just on the off chance, anyone who is doing research on choking is watching this video, could you please take a note from the BJJ research page and look into contrast imaging for tear detection? How many of these people who are being choked frequently at the highest level with the most symptoms afterwards are dealing with tears they don't know about? Does it even take that much pressure or repetition to cause one? Is it unique to BJJ as a sport, or could it also be happening in kink? We don't definitively know. Is there anything to suggest that memory and mood problems could be linked not just to the choking itself, but an injury that came from choking that was missed, for example? After all, something like a TIA can last for just a few minutes, and I'm not a doctor. Clearly, none of this is medical advice, so maybe I am missing something. But the potential causal link does seem pretty freaking scary to me. And maybe it should be frightening. I've always heard that choking could lead to things like heart attacks or strokes, but I've never seen it in black and white before. I've seen people laugh it off, actually, implying that it's ridiculous to think that choking could lead to a stroke. But now, what once felt like a distant, rare problem feels like a real possibility, even when doing it safely, if that's even a thing, because safe choking doesn't exist. And like I've said, abstinence-only education is not the way to go. That will not solve anything. It will not make the problem go away. But what is the solution here? How can we accurately teach kids, teens, and young adults what the risks are when we're still figuring them out? Will it really do anything to teach an 18-year-old that choking could cause a stroke if they're not even taught the basics about consent and boundary setting? We need to be here, and we're barely here. Do we need to start doing AIDS-style PSAs for choking like the ones I had to watch in school? Would that be effective, or would that just create needless panic and more secretive behavior? I mean, at least with more common STI exposure, we can tell people to do things like wear condoms to be safer, but there's no safe version of choking. I don't know what the answers are. But I do know, as someone who is an adult who educates other adults, I'm going to start being even more cautious when I talk about breath play. There are many other alternatives, and if you can't stomach the risk, there's no reason to keep doing it. Since the jury is still out on what all of the exact risks are, maybe we just need to build awareness right now. Maybe you can share the article or share this video if you liked it. If you hear someone say something like, "Blood chokes are perfectly safe. Look what they do in judo," inform them that the reality is messier than that, and that it's still not really clear how safe it actually is. And I would really, really like to see some medical channels cover this issue. Are there any, vascular neurologists on YouTube? Can we get one of those on the line? And again, I am not a doctor. Maybe this study has some glaring issues I don't know how to figure out because I'm not a neurobiologist. Or maybe a comparison to BJJ injuries isn't really apt. But I'd like to have someone who does know take notice and be able to give their assessment. Please, I really do think the only way we are ever going to see things like this change in terms of the lack of information is to get more people aware of it and to advocate for seeing more research there, of having people cover this and give their perspective, because this is dangerous. To me, this is like, imagine when any other now very common sex act started being popular, let's say like anal, right? And we had no knowledge whatsoever on like what safer anal looked like. We had nothing we could tell people because we had no data about it. That would be nutso. That would be terrible. That would lead to very bad outcomes. And so I want to make sure that we are moving in the right direction, so I can stop panicking, first of all. And so hopefully other people don't have to panic. And I mean, maybe panic is a strong word. I am certainly going to be very cautious going forward. I think that there are just too many missing pieces of data to feel confident talking about this without like some very big caveats. So with that being said, let me know what you thought about this. I am trying to cover more kind of news topics, scientific articles about BDSM, because they are very easy to miss and not always highlighted. And why not? I do like covering research. It's not normally this dour. But if you did enjoy this and you want to see more from me, you can subscribe. I make videos twice a week about all sorts of different kink and BDSM related topics, from education to reaction videos. And also, if you want to support what I do, the best way to do that is with Patreon. Link to that will be down below. If you do already support me there, thank you so, so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.